What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Reparations Report. I'm your host, the People's Champ, K. Snyder. Thanks for watching. Just want to say off the top, thank you to everyone who saw our first episode. I got so much positive feedback and so much good vibration from everyone. I just want to say thank you so much. We're encouraged, and you ain't seen nothing yet. We are just getting started here on the Reparations Report. I'm K. Snyder. I wrote the book Reparations 101, your sponsor for this show. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you here today, because today's when we finally get into it. We're actually gonna discuss some things. That's why I'm sitting here on my couch in my office. I just want to have a simple conversation with you, my family, my friends. So if any of you have met me and you've come to my tent, one of the first things you're going to see is this little motto here: intellectual clarity and moral conviction. Sold here. Intellectual clarity and moral convictions are what I believe to be the essential components to catalyze change. This is very essential if you look back into what's happened in the quote-unquote civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s. If you've ever seen the old black and white films of Montgomery and Birmingham and places like that, you see these immaculately dressed black folks. They're in their Sunday best. They're all dressed up, and they're going to protest. Actually, they're going to demand their rights. They're going to demand. They've decided to demand. Okay? So, in as much they're putting on their Sunday best. They're dressed, they're clean, they're ready to sing, they're ready to march, they're ready to shout. They know they will face severe resistance at these protests. If you've seen these films, they're being hosed, they're having dogs sick against them, they're being beaten with nightsticks, and they're singing and they're marching. What makes people do that? Who of you out there would get dressed in your Sunday clothes to go and get attacked by German Shepherds? What would make a person do that? They would have to have intellectual clarity, wouldn't they? They would have to be intellectually clear as to why they're going to face this opposition. They have to know what the stakes are and why it's important that they show up and be counted. And the second thing that makes you face these dogs and these fire hoses and these police and these nightsticks is the second half of it: moral conviction. Moral conviction means that we will not be moved. To quote the old HBCU song that I learned as a child growing up, right? We shall not be moved. We are here. This is our demand. We don't care what the consequences are, be they arrest, be they bruises, right? Batters and bruises and cuts and abrasions, be they fire hoses and police dogs. We will not be moved. That demonstrates moral conviction. The Reparations Report is here to serve you with intellectual clarity and moral conviction. All right? So on that note, let's get into the book. In the book, this is our first segment of In the Book, because I believe in order for us to have intellectual clarity, we have to start with the basics. So that's where we're going to begin. And here's the book, The People's Handbook, Reparations 101. We're going to open it up. And like I said, we're going to start at the very beginning. We're going to go to chapter 1. And if you can close in on that there, you can see it. It says chapter 1, Roots of Reparations, how we got here, in the book. How we got here. I know we've all asked ourselves that. I know a lot of you have various historical and scholarly backgrounds, so all respect to that. But for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to start the conversation someplace that we all know, something that's probably in your house, on your kitchen table right now. It's our old friend, the sugar bowl. Sugar, our old friend. You know, I like a little bit of sugar in my coffee, like everybody else. It's what gives the caffeine its sweetener. Let me get a little sip of that here. Coffee and sugar. One of the first great matches in taste combinations. Sugar. So in 1492, when Columbus arrived in the Caribbean islands and visited and met the Arawak and Taino people, their intention was exploitation. Spain was in a rough economic situation, and the trip to the New World was all about finding profit, finding gold, finding revenue, finding money for Spain. This is without debate. They run into Cuba, Hispaniola, what we call today's DR, and Haiti, the Bahamas, these islands in 1492. They immediately subdue the local tribes, the Arawak, the Taino, and put them to work on sugar farms because sugar was all the rage in Europe. Coffee was coming over from Arabia. Sugar and coffee were a thing. They needed sugar. They wanted sugar. They put the local indigenous people to work on sugar farms. They also, along with the Bible and Christianity, they brought European diseases to the New World. They brought tuberculosis, smallpox, gonorrhea, syphilis, yada, yada, yada. Within 10, 15 years, the local indigenous tribes were basically decimated. They were wiped out. Of course, along with the diseases, they also brought the whip and the burden of industrial slavery, such as by early 1500s, I'm talking 1504, 1506, right around there, the first Africans arrive in Cuba and Hispaniola. The first Africans arrived in the early 1500s, pre-1510, again, 1506, 1504, somewhere in there. This is the birth of the slave industrial complex as we know it today. You see, friends, sugar isn't just a crop. Sugar is the first global commodity that requires mass labor, machinery, finance, in order to be profitable. If you've got a 10-acre field of sugar, there's no profit in that. Sugar is very hard to work and very extensive in its process as far as profitability. But if you've got 1,000 acres and you've got free labor, this becomes profitable. This is the birth of plantation capitalism. These Caribbean sugar profits proved to be the foundation for your global banks and other operations. Now, in addition to the sugar, Spain is still running around the Caribbean and Central America. They run into Mexico, Cortez and his friends, and they run into silver and gold. Boom, bling, bling. Now, once you find gold and silver, you're going to need people to mine the gold and the silver, obviously. Well, what do you think happened? The same thing that happened in the Caribbean. The local tribes died out. The Spanish bought in. Guess who else? Africans. And Africans have actually been in Mexico and Bolivia since the mid-1500s, 1540, 1550, in that space right there. Okay? So, as a result of that, Spain has the sugar, they've got the silver, they've got the gold. Spain becomes top dog in Europe very quickly. Within 100 years, Spain is not only supplying half the world's sugar, but it's also supplying half the world's gold and silver as well. The peso actually becomes the world's first default currency. Bet you didn't know that. It was the peso, right? So, as a result of that, by the time of 1600, Spain is already the dominant power in Europe, and slavery as a facilitator or a catalyst of capitalism has become proven as a concept, proof of concept. You're familiar with that. So by the time Jamestown rolls around, slavery had already been a thing for over 100 years. That's important to know. Capitalism was born with a whip in one hand and a handful of gold in the other hand. So by 1619, when the Dutch arrive with 20 Africans, or Negars as the Dutch called them, the Dutch had a problem saying the word Negroes, and it evolved into the word Negars. There's one. But by the time the Dutch arrived in 1619, the English were way behind the Spanish. As we discussed, the Spanish were up in sugar and gold and silver, and they were running the board. And France and England were scrambling. Now, once those Africans arrived in Jamestown in 1619, the system of the day was called indentured servitude, which usually happened when someone came from Europe to the New World as a way to pay for passage. They would say, I'll work in your colony for a number of years, usually 6 to 8. And then at the end of that time in servitude, they would receive their natural rights as a citizen and as a human being. Now, once the Africans arrived there in 1619, tobacco profits did what? They skyrocketed, didn't they? Virginia was saved. They could see their way out. And it was that point that the Virginia House of Burgesses, right? They shifted from indentured servitude to lifelong slavery around 1640. By 1660, the entire Virginia legislature had codified it into law that any child born of a slave were also they themselves slaves. So at this point, 1660, that was also when the English crown chartered the Royal African Company and supplied it with the monopoly on all slave operations in West Africa. Slavery was blooming and it wasn't going anywhere, so the English crown jumped in the game with the Royal African Company. Now, they may have passed into time, but here's a name you may have heard of, Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London, founded in 1688 in a coffee house to ensure slaving expeditions to West Africa. 1690, Barclays Bank came along. Shout out, Barclays Center, we see you. 1690, also with money from the English crown, began investing in slaving expeditions. Royal Bank of Scotland, another bank that's still around to this day, was founded in 1727 for these same purposes. Now, if they got into this business all the way back then in the 17th century, do you think those expeditions were profitable? I'm going to guess that they probably were, but did you know how profitable? Here's an example. A single cargo of between 200 to 300 slaves would net profit in today's money in the millions, several millions of dollars for 200 to 300 Africans on a boat. That was back in the 1690s, in the 1600s. That's why reparations. Here's another one. There was a man named Sir John Hawkins. He is famously credited with saying that one African was worth 2 white men or 3 Indians. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that Africans in and of themselves were a prized human commodity in and of itself. It also makes the chilling admission that Africans, or Negars, were seen as nothing more than valuable, repeatable profit units in the game of mass production. Negars are repeatable profit units in the game of mass production. Mass production, by the way, is the engine of capitalism. Capitalism's holy trinity. And the mass production formula goes like this. It's a trinity, right? Land, labor, resources. Or land, resources, labor. With the advent of the New World, they had all this land because they had slaughtered all the indigenous people. So they had all this land. They had the entire Caribbean, they had Mexico, they had South America, all this land with all these resources. Africa provided the key element of labor. These things combine, land, resources, labor, to create what I call the Big Bang of capitalism. There's no way around it. And then when you throw in the fact of it's officially government sanctioned. Slavery's written into law in Virginia in the 1660s, stating that the child of a slave mother is also in a condition of lifelong slavery. It's also sanctioned by the British Crown with the formation of the Royal African Company and Barclays Bank, along with the World Bank of Scotland. Later, these things are baked into the cake. This instructs us that the economic and political policy of racism is significantly older than the United States itself. Slavery was not America's original sin. It's its original recipe. That's why reparations. You're watching the Reparations Report. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe.